Why did the room go quiet the moment she stepped inside? No one could explain it afterward. Not really. The mess hall at Fort Davidson was always loud on Friday nights, metal trays clattering, laughter ricocheting off concrete walls, the familiar mix of sweat, grease, and burnt coffee hanging in the air. But when Victoria Brennan reached the serving counter, something shifted. A pause. A subtle tightening, as if the room itself had inhaled and forgotten how to breathe. She felt it before she saw it. The weight of attention. Too many eyes. She kept her gaze down. That was safer, it always had been. Military uniforms are just costumes for kids playing dress-up now, huh? The voice cut through the hall like a blade dragged across stone. Victoria froze. 200 conversations died at once. Forks stopped midair. Laughter collapsed into silence. Every head turned toward the small woman standing by the counter, her tray trembling just enough to notice if you were looking closely. Sergeant Derek Callahan stepped forward, boots heavy, confidence loud. 6'4" of hardened posture and practiced intimidation. He wore authority the way some men wore armor, thick, inflexible, and meant to crush anything softer than itself. Victoria felt the heat rise in her cheeks. Not anger, not yet, something closer to old memory, the kind that lived in the body, not the mind. She didn't look up. Well, Derek continued, his voice dripping amusement. Who authorized this little fashion show? This is a military installation, not a community theater. Laughter followed, sharp, immediate. Phones appeared in hands lifted with casual cruelty. Someone whistled, someone else snorted. Victoria's fingers tightened around the edge of her tray. She reminded herself to breathe, slow, controlled, in through the nose, out through the mouth. She looked exactly like what they thought she was. Small, too quiet, out of place. Her oversized jacket swallowed her frame. The gray t-shirt beneath clung awkwardly, civilian soft, wrong against the rigid geometry of the room. Blonde hair pulled into a messy bun, loose strands framing a face that looked too young, too gentle, too unguarded. Pray. Derek took another step closer. She could smell his cologne, cheap, aggressive, the kind meant to announce presence before words ever did. Seriously, he said, who signed off on this? She swallowed. I have orders to report here. Her voice barely carried, but the microphone of humiliation was already on. Orders, Derek laughed. From who? Your drama teacher. More laughter, louder now, hungrier. Victoria nodded once, eyes still lowered. The posture read as shame to everyone watching, shoulders slightly rounded, hands not quite steady. But inside, something else was happening. Her eyes moved. Not darting. Sweeping. Left exit, blocked by 3 bodies. Right corridor, clear for 12 seconds. Angles, distances, reflections in stainless steel. Who was recording? Who was enjoying it too much? She shifted her weight, not away but into balance. Captain Ethan Drake noticed. From a shadowed booth near the emergency exit, he lowered his newspaper a fraction. Not enough to be obvious, just enough to confirm what his instincts had been whispering since she walked in. That stance wasn't fear. It was control. He activated the recorder hidden in his jacket. Victoria felt the circle close. Derek's squad drifted nearer, the way wolves did when they sensed weakness. Lieutenant Angela Pierce joined them, black hair perfectly styled, uniform immaculate. Her smile was polished and poisonous. "Oh my God," Angela said, voice dripping mock sympathy. "Sweetie, are you lost? The costume party's downtown." Phones tilted closer. Victoria's grip tightened, not on the tray anymore, on herself. "I have orders," she repeated softly. Derek leaned in, too close, invading space deliberately. "Look at her," he said to the room. "Lost little princess wearing daddy's clothes." Someone clapped. Someone filmed from a better angle. Victoria stood still and let it happen. That was the part no one understood. She wasn't frozen. She was waiting. The insults piled up, each one landing with practiced cruelty, and with every word something inside her steadied. Old training surfaced, not the kind you learned in classrooms, the kind etched into muscle and breath. Captain Drake's gaze sharpened. The micro-movements were wrong, too precise, too economical. Her breathing hadn't changed since the first insult. Fear changed breathing. This hadn't. Corporal Grant Morrison stepped forward, arms thick as cables, voice booming with authority. "Hey, Princess," he called. "You know basic drill commands, right?" The challenge hung in the air. Grant smiled. He expected tears, confusion, collapse. "Yes, Corporal," Victoria said. Her voice changed. She snapped to attention. The transformation was instant, posture aligned, chin lifted, shoulders squared. The movement was so clean, so exact, that the laughter faltered mid-breath. Grant blinked. About face. She turned perfect. Present arms. Her hands moved with textbook precision, presenting an invisible rifle with flawless form. The room shifted again. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Something was wrong. They could feel it now. Derek frowned. He hated losing control. "Lucky guess," he snapped. "Anyone can memorize a few moves. Let's see real equipment." He cleared his sidearm and shoved it toward her. "Field strip, 30 seconds." Phones zoomed in. Victoria accepted the weapon. Her hands moved. Not fast. Efficient. Click. Slide. Spring. Frame. The pistol came apart like it belonged to her, pieces laid out in perfect order. 15 seconds. She reassembled it even faster. 12 seconds, smooth, silent. She handed it back. 27 seconds. Silence slammed into the room. Derek stared at the weapon as if it had betrayed him. Angela's smile cracked. Grant took a step back without realizing it. Victoria returned to her previous posture, eyes down, hands behind her back, as if nothing had happened. But Captain Drake was already sending a message. Target demonstrating advanced capability, increased surveillance. A young private spoke up from the edge of the crowd. His voice shook, but it carried. Maybe we should leave her alone." Derek's head snapped around. "What did you say?" The private swallowed. "She's not bothering anyone, Sergeant." Angela laughed sharply. "Awa, that's cute. The newbie's got a crush." Victoria lifted her eyes for half a second. She met the private's gaze. Not gratitude. Recognition. As if she had seen this moment before, knew how it ended. The room grew tense. Something was building. No one knew what, only that it wasn't entertainment anymore. And when the colonel walked in, authority cutting through the tension, Victoria felt the clock start ticking. Because whatever they thought she was, she wouldn't be allowed to stay invisible much longer. Why did the colonel stop the moment he saw her? Colonel James Harlow had walked into mess halls like this for 30 years. Different bases, different wars, same smells, same noise, same careless cruelty that bloomed when rank forgot restraint. He knew how rooms felt before anyone spoke, and this one felt wrong. Too quiet. He scanned the room once, phones half lowered, soldiers froze in mid-reaction, a sergeant standing stiff with irritation, a woman at attention who didn't look like she belonged, and yet somehow looked like the most grounded person there. "Explain," Harlow said. The word wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Derek Callahan stepped forward instantly, eager, voice polished with rehearsed confidence. "Sir, we were just correcting a uniform violation. Civilian attire in a restricted area." Harlow's eyes flicked to Victoria, took her in properly this time. The jacket, the shirt, the stance. That so? He asked. Yes, sir. Victoria didn't move, didn't speak, didn't defend herself. She didn't need to. Captain Ethan Drake stood, slowly, deliberately. The movement drew attention without demanding it. With respect, Colonel, he said, this doesn't look like correction. It looks like public humiliation. A ripple of discomfort moved through the crowd. Derek bristled. Sir, Captain Drake is mistaken, we were. Harlow raised a hand. Silence snapped into place. He walked closer, not to Derek. To her. Name, he said. Brennan, sir. Rank. There it was. The pause was almost invisible, but the room felt it. Petty Officer Second Class, she said calmly. Murmurs exploded. Navy. Wrong branch. Wrong base. Wrong assumptions. Harlow's eyebrow lifted slightly. Then why are you dressed like that? She met his eyes for the first time. Because I was told to arrive unnoticed. The words landed softly, but they landed. Harlow studied her longer now, really studied her. The scars hidden beneath sleeves, the quiet readiness, the absence of ego. Dismissed, he said to the room. Confusion followed. Sir, Derek asked. I said dismissed. Chairs scraped, people hesitated, then moved. Phones disappeared. Conversations restarted in forced tones. The mess hall slowly returned to life, but something had cracked. Something couldn't be unseen. Harlow turned back to Victoria. Walk with me. She fell into step beside him, perfect distance, not too close, not deferential. Drake followed a few paces behind. They exited into the cold evening air. The sun was dropping low, casting long shadows across the concrete. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Harlow said quietly, You let that go on longer than most would. Yes, sir. Why? She considered the question, didn't rush. Because how someone treats you when they think you're powerless tells you everything you need to know. Harlow nodded once. You're here for Task Group Blackwater. Yes, sir. Drake's step slowed. That name carried weight, classified, surgical, quiet. Harlow stopped near a row of vehicles. You understand that your presence here will disrupt morale. Victoria's lips twitched, not a smile, an acknowledgement. Yes, sir. And you're comfortable with that? She hesitated, not long, just enough to be honest. No, sir. That surprised him. But comfort isn't the objective. Silence stretched between them. Harlow exhaled. You'll brief tomorrow. Until then you're restricted to quarters, no contact. Yes, sir. As he walked away, Drake lingered. They underestimated you, he said. They usually do. He studied her. You didn't correct them. No. Why? She looked out across the base, floodlights coming on, night settling in. Because correcting them would have been about pride, she said. Letting them reveal themselves was about truth. Drake nodded slowly. You're going to make enemies. I already have. He hesitated. That tattoo, the dragon, that wasn't regulation. Her hand moved to her sleeve instinctively, covered. No. But it means something. Yes. He didn't press. That night Victoria lay on the narrow bunk in temporary quarters. The room was sparse, bare walls, a desk bolted to the floor, no photos, no personal effects. She stared at the ceiling. The humiliation replayed in fragments, not the words, the expressions, the laughter that came too easily, the way some people had enjoyed it, the way others had stayed silent. She closed her eyes. She had learned long ago that silence could be louder than screaming. Sleep came in fits. Dreams dragged her backward. Desert heat. Rotor wash. Blood and sand that refused to absorb it. A voice in her ear counting breaths that suddenly stopped. She woke before dawn, heart steady, breath controlled. Training kicked in. She showered, dressed, rolled her sleeves halfway up as she tied her boots. The dragon emerged. Black ink, coiled, scarred, its wings folded not in flight but in restraint. Old script ran along its spine, coordinates, names, dates. It wasn't decoration. It was memory. At 600, she stood outside the briefing room. Inside, Task Group Blackwater waited. Operators from multiple branches, faces hardened by things they didn't talk about, men who had earned their confidence through survival. They looked up as she entered. Assessed, judged. Someone smirked, "We're being briefed by her." She ignored it. Colonel Harlow stood. "This is Petty Officer Brennan. She'll be leading mission analysis." A beat. Laughter threatened, but didn't quite arrive. She stepped forward, placed a data drive on the table. 3 weeks ago, she began, voice steady, a reconnaissance team disappeared near the Ar-Rashid corridor. Satellite imagery shows no engagement, no debris, no signals. She tapped the screen. Images flickered to life. But something followed them out. She paused. Not on radar, not on infrared. Eyes sharpened now. "You don't vanish a six-man team without leaving a shadow," she continued, "unless you understand how shadows move." She looked around the table. Someone does. Silence settled, real silence, focused. One of the operators leaned back. "And you know this how?" She met his gaze. "Because I trained with them." That landed. And because I was the last voice they heard. No one spoke. Harlow watched the room change, resistance melting into attention. Victoria felt the weight of it settle, the responsibility, the quiet promise she had made to herself years ago. She would not be loud. She would not demand respect. She would earn it the only way that mattered. By bringing them home. And if the dragon on her skin ever saw daylight again, it would be because restraint had failed. Not because pride had spoken. Why did the room feel colder the moment she stopped talking? No one moved, not right away. The screen at the end of the briefing room froze on a satellite still, grainy desert terrain, empty at first glance, unforgiving at second. 6 men had walked into that nothingness and never walked out. Victoria let the silence breathe. She learned that rushing answers made people defensive. Silence made them curious, and curiosity, when guided carefully, became trust. "You're saying they were taken," one of the operators finally said. "I'm saying they were followed," she replied. "Taken implies chaos. This wasn't chaos." Another voice, sharper. "Then what was it?" "Preparation." She advanced the image frame by frame. Subtle distortions appeared along the dunes, heat signatures that didn't match terrain or wildlife, movements that weren't random. "These gaps," she said quietly, "they repeat every 8 seconds. That's not nature, that's discipline." The skepticism in the room thinned, not gone but weakened. A man with salt and pepper hair leaned forward. His eyes were tired in a way only long wars created. "What aren't you telling us?" Victoria felt the familiar tension coil in her chest. There it was. The part she never led with. She hesitated just long enough for them to notice. "There's a pattern," she said, "but it doesn't show up on any system you're using." Harlow folded his arms. "Explain." She exhaled slowly. 3 years ago, during a joint operation in the same region, a unit encountered similar anomalies, movements that avoided surveillance, engagements that left no evidence. They dismissed it as faulty equipment. Drake's jaw tightened. "They were wrong," she continued. "Because," one operator pressed, "because I was embedded with that unit." Eyes shifted toward her, not hostile now, measuring. "We lost 2 people," she said. "Not in combat, not officially." Someone scoffed under their breath. "That doesn't happen." Victoria looked at him, calm, direct. It does, she said, when no one wants the paperwork. The room went still again. She changed the image. A hand-drawn overlay appeared, old-fashioned, almost archaic. What you're dealing with isn't invisible, she said. It's patient. The words settled heavily. Patient enough to learn your habits, your reaction times, patient enough to let you think you're safe. She paused. And patient enough to wait until you're tired. No one laughed now. The briefing ended without applause or argument, just nods, quiet acknowledgments. Operators filed out with new weight in their shoulders. Harlow stayed behind. You didn't tell them everything, he said. No, sir. Why? She met his gaze. Because they don't need the whole truth yet, they need focus. And when will they need it? When it stops being theoretical. He studied her for a long moment. You'll deploy with them. Yes, sir. Not as Overwatch. She didn't react. On the ground, he continued, embedded. A few seconds passed. Yes, sir. Outside, the wind had picked up. Dust swept across the tarmac in low, restless sheets. Helicopters thudded somewhere beyond the hangars. The base was waking into purpose. Drake caught up with her near the motor pool. You didn't have to say yes that quickly, he said. She didn't slow. Yes, I did. They'll test you, he warned. They already are. He hesitated. Callahan filed a complaint. She stopped walking. Against you, Drake added silently. What kind, she asked. Disrespect, undermining authority, failure to integrate. Victoria nodded once, expected. You could push back. No. That's not always strength. She turned to him then, really turned. Strength isn't always visible, she said, but it's always deliberate. Drake watched her walk away. For the first time, he wondered how many times she'd had to learn that. The deployment came fast, too fast for comfort. Night swallowed the desert as the transport lifted off. Inside, the team sat in practice stillness, weapons secured, eyes distant. Victoria took a seat near the rear. No one spoke to her, not yet. She welcomed the quiet. The helicopter vibrated beneath them, a steady, familiar rhythm. It grounded her. Her fingers brushed the edge of the dragon beneath her sleeve. She didn't look at it, didn't need to. Across from her, the operator who'd questioned her earlier watched openly now. You really think something's out there, he said. She nodded, I know it is. He frowned, that's not the same thing. It is, she replied softly, when you've seen it work. The helicopter descended miles from the last known coordinates. They moved on foot. Night vision washed the world into shades of green. The desert breathed around them. Victoria took point, not by assignment but by instinct. No one stopped her. They moved for hours, slow, careful. Then she stopped. The signal was subtle. 2 fingers raised, the team froze. What is it? Someone whispered. She crouched, touched the sand. A faint disturbance, barely perceptible. They changed direction, she murmured. How do you know? She tilted her head, listened. They always do, she said, right before contact. The team spread out, tension thickened. Minutes passed, then more. Nothing happened. A few operators exchanged glances. Doubt crept back in. Then one of the rear sensors blinked. And died. No alarm, no noise. Just gone. Victoria's pulse remained steady. They're watching, she whispered. They want to see how we react. A heartbeat later, a shadow moved where shadows shouldn't. Not fast. Purposeful. The team adjusted formation without command. Training took over. No panic, just readiness. Victoria tracked movement patterns, not targets. Angles, pauses, intention. This isn't an ambush, she said quietly. It's a test. A pause. Then pressure. Not impact, not sound. Pressure that made the air feel heavy. One operator staggered, caught himself. "You feel that?" he breathed. "Yes," she said, "breathe through it." They moved again, slow, controlled. The shadow withdrew. Minutes later, the desert returned to stillness. No shots fired, no bodies, no evidence. Only absence. Back at base, the debrief was subdued. No one argued now. No one joked. Harlow listened without interruption. "So it's not attacking," he said finally. "No," Victoria replied. "Not yet." "Why?" She considered her answer. "Because it's deciding if we're worth the cost." Silence followed. That night, alone in her quarters, Victoria sat on the edge of the bunk and finally rolled up her sleeve fully. The dragon stared back at her. It had been earned, not in glory, in survival, in restraint. She traced one of the names etched into the ink. People thought tattoos were about identity. For her, it was accountability. She lay back, eyes open, listening to the hum of the bass. Tomorrow, the questions would get sharper. The doubt more dangerous. And eventually, someone would push her. Not with words. With consequence. And when that happened, she would have to decide how much of herself she was willing to reveal, and how much of the dragon the world could afford to see. Why did she hesitate when the order finally came? The message arrived just before dawn. No alarm, no dramatic summons, just a quiet vibration on the secure device beside her bed. Victoria read it once, then again, letting the words settle before they became weight. Movement confirmed. Non-hostile posture. Observation phase ending. She sat up slowly. The room was still dark, the bass hushed in that fragile hour between night and obligation. For a moment she stayed there, elbows resting on her knees, hands loosely clasped. This was the part no one talked about, the space between knowing and acting. She hadn't hesitated out there in the desert, not when the pressure closed in, not when the shadow moved with intent, but this was different. This was commitment. By the time she reached the operations center, the team was already assembling, faces sharper now, less skepticism, more questions they didn't ask out loud. The room smelled like burnt coffee and anticipation. Harlow stood at the head of the table. He didn't waste words. "They've repositioned," he said, "closer to civilian routes, still observing, still avoiding engagement." Someone muttered, "Like they're waiting." Victoria felt the familiar tightening in her chest. "Yes," she said quietly, "they're waiting." Harlow looked at her. For what? For a mistake. The silence that followed wasn't disbelief. It was acceptance. That was new. The plan was simple on paper. Insert a small team. Establish presence without provocation. Confirm patterns. Withdraw before escalation. Simple plans were dangerous. They moved out at dusk. Same helicopter, same desert, different feeling. Victoria sat across from Callahan this time. He hadn't spoken to her since the mess hall, not directly, but his presence was loud anyway, rigid posture, jaw set, eyes refusing to meet hers. He was here because he'd insisted, framed it as oversight, accountability. Harlow had allowed it. Victoria understood why. Sometimes people needed to see things for themselves. The helicopter touched down farther east. They moved fast, boots crunching softly against sand and stone. The air felt attentive, as if the land itself was listening. Callahan stayed close, too close. "You comfortable out here?" he asked under his breath. "Yes." "That confidence thing," he said, "it won't save you." She didn't respond. Confidence was what kept her steady. They reached the observation ridge just after full dark. The world flattened into shadows and stars. The team spread out, sensors deployed, eyes scanning. Minutes passed, then an hour. Nothing. Tension crept in sideways, the kind that made people second-guess instincts. Callahan shifted restlessly. "This is a waste," he whispered. "We're chasing ghosts." Victoria lay prone beside him, eyes fixed on the horizon. "No," she said softly, "ghosts don't leave patterns." She felt it before she saw it. A subtle shift, not movement, intention. The pressure returned, lighter this time, curious. "They're closer," she murmured. Callahan scoffed. "You keep saying they like it." He stopped. The sensor near his position flickered. Then stabilized. Then flickered again. "Is that malfunctioning?" he asked. "No," Victoria said. "That's acknowledgement." A low sound rolled across the ridge. Not a roar, not a growl, something deeper, resonant, felt more than heard. Callahan's breath hitched, just once. "What was that?" Victoria didn't answer right away. Because this time, the shadow didn't withdraw. It approached. Slowly. Deliberately. The team held position, fingers near triggers but not tense. They had learned from her example, reaction would be noticed. The shape emerged just enough to be perceived, not fully visible, not fully hidden, a distortion in space that suggested mass without confirming it. Callahan swallowed. "That's not possible." "No," she agreed, "but it's here." The pressure intensified, not threatening, evaluating. Victoria shifted onto one knee, removed her helmet, let it rest on the sand beside her. "What are you doing?" Callahan hissed. "Showing intent." She rolled up her sleeve. The dragon caught the starlight. Black ink against pale skin, scarred lines, coordinates etched along its spine like a map of loss. The creature's eye, inked with painful precision, seemed to stare back at the distortion. The air changed. The pressure eased slightly. Callahan stared at her arm, at the tattoo, at the scars he hadn't noticed before. "What is that?" he whispered. "A record," she said, "and a promise." The distortion stilled. Victoria spoke, not loudly, not in command, but in something older, measured, respectful. "We see you," she said. "We're not here to hunt." Silence answered. Then a response. Not words, a shift in the pressure, a subtle alignment, as if something had turned to face her fully. Callahan's heart pounded. He could feel it in his ears. "You can't talk to it," he breathed. "I'm not," she replied. "I'm listening." Minutes stretched, sweat cooled on skin, muscles trembled from stillness. Then the pressure receded. The distortion faded. Gone. The desert exhaled. No one moved for a long time. Back at base, the debrief was quiet, not because there was nothing to say, but because no one wanted to be the first to reduce it to language. Callahan sat rigid, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. "You knew," he said finally, voice low. "You knew it would react to you." Victoria met his eyes, not triumph, not accusation. "I hoped," she said. "I didn't know." "That tattoo," he pressed, "it meant something to them." "It means something to me." He shook his head. "You let them see you." "Yes." "That's reckless." She considered him, really looked at him now, not the rank, not the bluster, but the fear underneath. "Sometimes," she said gently, "being seen is the only way to avoid violence." Callahan looked away. Later that night, alone again, Victoria stood in front of the small mirror in her quarters. She studied the dragon, traced the lines with careful fingers. She hadn't planned to reveal it, not like that, but something in the air had demanded honesty. And honesty had answered. Her device buzzed again. New message. Authorization expanded. Liaison protocol approved. She closed her eyes. The mission was changing. And so was her role. Across the base, Callahan sat on his bunk, staring at nothing. The laughter from the mess hall felt distant now, hollow. He replayed the moment she'd knelt in the sand, the calm, the restraint, the way the unknown had responded to her, not with fear but recognition. For the first time, he questioned what strength actually looked like. And for the first time, the answer unsettled him. Victoria lay down, lights off, eyes open. She thought of the shadow, of the way it had paused, considered. She thought of all the times she'd been underestimated, dismissed, reduced. Sometimes dignity didn't demand acknowledgement. Sometimes it waited. And when it finally stepped forward, it didn't raise its voice. It simply changed the room. Tomorrow, the world would ask more of her. And she would have to decide, not whether she was strong enough, but whether the cost of restraint was still worth paying. Why did the bass feel different the morning after no one could explain what had happened? It wasn't louder. If anything, it was quieter. Conversations softened as she passed. Laughter didn't stop, but it bent, curved away from her like water around stone. Doors opened a second earlier. Salutes came sharper, more precise, not out of fear, out of uncertainty. Victoria noticed all of it. She didn't let it change her pace. In the operations center, the screens glowed with new data, patterns emerging where none had existed before, movement corridors, pauses, intent mapped into probability. The unknown was becoming legible. Harlow stood with his back to the room, hands clasped behind him. He didn't turn when she entered. "They responded to you," he said. "Yes, sir." "They ignored everything else." "Yes, sir." He turned then. His expression wasn't awe, it wasn't relief, it was burden. "That makes you an asset," he said, "and a liability." She nodded once. "I understand. You may be the only reason this doesn't escalate." "And I may be the reason it does," she replied. Harlow studied her. "You've been here before." She didn't answer, because yes would have required memory. They briefed the team, expanded scope. No longer observation, communication, not dialogue exactly, presence, controlled exposure, careful patience. Callahan stood at the edge of the room, arms crossed. He hadn't spoken to her since the ridge. His confidence had fractured into something quieter, something heavier. When the briefing ended, he approached her slowly, like someone stepping onto unfamiliar ground. "I was wrong," he said. She waited. "About you," he added, "about what strength looks like." She met his eyes. There was no satisfaction in it, only recognition. "Being wrong isn't a failure," she said. "Staying wrong is." He nodded once, sharp, almost painful. That afternoon they moved again. Same region, same desert, different posture. This time Victoria walked openly. No helmet, sleeves rolled, the dragon visible. The team followed at distance, weapons low, eyes alert but not aggressive. The air thickened as they crossed an invisible threshold. Pressure returned, but gentler now, curious, not confrontational. She stopped at a natural rise, raised one hand. The team halted. She knelt, placed her palm against the sand. A long moment passed. Then the pressure shifted. Closer. Callahan felt it and forced himself not to step back, forced himself to breathe. The distortion appeared again, clearer this time, still not fully visible but undeniably present. Victoria didn't speak. She waited. The presence circled, not physically, perceptually, as if examining her from angles that didn't exist. The air hummed faintly, vibrating against bone. Then memory surged. Not hers. Impressions, not images, sensations. Loss. Intrusion. Fire from the sky. Running without direction. Victoria's breath hitched. The dragon burned against her skin, not heat but awareness. The coordinates etched into the ink seemed to pulse, aligning with something unseen. She understood then. This wasn't a predator. It was a survivor. Her voice came soft. Careful, you were hurt. The pressure stilled. We were hurt too, she added. Callahan's eyes widened. She's. Harlow raised a hand. Silence. Victoria felt something shift inside her chest, a crack opening where armor had been. They came with noise, she continued, with certainty, with weapons that didn't listen. The pressure tightened, then eased. We learned restraint, she said, late, too late for some. A pause. Then acknowledgement. Not agreement. Understanding. The distortion withdrew slightly, not retreating, giving space. Victoria exhaled. That night the base buzzed quietly, reports drafted, language chosen with care, words mattered now. In her quarters, Victoria sat alone, elbows on knees, hands clasped. Her body trembled, not from fear but release. The emotional cost of being open pressed down hard once the moment had passed. Her device chimed. Callahan. Can we talk? She stared at the message, longer than necessary. Then, yes. They met outside, the air cool, stars sharp overhead. I didn't know how much you were carrying, he said finally. No one ever does, she replied. I thought authority meant control, he said. I thought volume was strength. She looked at him, really looked. And now I think strength is choosing not to use what you can. She nodded. That's closer. He hesitated. What happens if they decide we're a threat? Victoria looked out into the dark, toward the desert. Then I step back, she said, and let the distance speak. And if distance isn't enough? Her fingers brushed the dragon. Then restraint becomes sacrifice. Callahan swallowed. The following days blurred into careful advances, small gestures, withdrawals, returns, each interaction teaching both sides where the edges were. The presence never crossed a certain line. Neither did they. Trust didn't bloom, but it took root. Until the day the alarm came. Not from sensors. From a civilian convoy rerouted through the corridor. Unaware, unprotected. And moving straight into a place that no longer tolerated noise. Victoria read the alert and felt the old weight return. This time, restraint wouldn't be enough. This time she would have to choose. Between revealing everything she was, or letting strangers pay for silence they didn't understand. She stood, rolling up her sleeves fully. The dragon watched. And for the first time since she'd earned it, she wondered. Not what it meant to survive, but what it meant to be responsible for being seen. Why did she feel calm when everything finally stood on the edge of breaking? The convoy was less than 20 minutes out when Victoria reached the operations floor. Civilian vehicles, contractors and local families mixed together by an outdated reroute order that never should have cleared. They moved slowly, confidently, unaware. The desert didn't reward ignorance. Harlow stood over the map, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the projected route. We can divert them, he said, but it'll take time. We don't have time, someone replied. The pressure was already rising. Not physically, not yet, but she could feel it the way you felt a storm long before the clouds arrived. The presence was alert now. No curiosity, no patience. Decision time. Victoria stepped forward. I'll go alone, she said. Every head turned. No, Harlow said immediately. That's not an option. It's the only one that doesn't end with fear, she replied. On either side. Callahan moved before he thought. You're asking to walk into something we still don't understand. She met his eyes, calm, certain. No, she said. I'm asking to be seen before they're startled into defending themselves. Silence fell. Harlow searched her face for doubt, found none, only resolve, quiet, heavy, earned. How long, he asked. 5 minutes, she said, maybe less. And if it goes wrong? She considered that, not dramatically, honestly. "Then I carry the cost," she said. No one argued after that. They dropped her at the boundary just as the convoy crested the ridge miles away, still blissfully unaware. The desert stretched empty and exposed beneath the sun. No distortion yet, just wind and heat and memory. Victoria walked forward alone. Each step was deliberate, not slow, not hurried, the kind of pace that said she wasn't afraid, but she wasn't challenging anything either. She stopped, removed her jacket. The dragon stretched fully along her arm now, unhidden, scarred, coiled, awake. She placed both hands at her sides and waited. The air thickened. Pressure descended like a held breath. The distortion emerged, larger than before, clearer, still not fully formed but undeniably present. The ground beneath her boots vibrated faintly, as if something immense was deciding how close to come. Victoria didn't speak. She remembered something an instructor once told her after a mission gone wrong. If you led with noise, you teach the world to answer you the same way. So she led with stillness. Images flooded her, not forced, not invasive, shared. Fire falling from the sky. Structures collapsing. Voices lost to static. Running that never ended. Pain wasn't screamed. It was endured. Her throat tightened. "We didn't know," she said softly, "not then." The pressure wavered. "We thought survival meant dominance," she continued. "We were wrong." The dragon's ink prickled. The names etched along its spine seemed heavier now, not symbols, testimony. "We learned too late," she said, "and some lessons cost lives." The presence shifted, not away, closer. Victoria stayed still. "You learned first," she said, "and you paid first." The desert went utterly silent. Then understanding. Not forgiveness, not absolution. Recognition. The pressure eased just slightly. Victoria felt it like a hand withdrawing, not in fear, but in acceptance. Behind her, miles away, the convoy slowed as the reroute finally reached them. Engines turned. Voices complained. No one knew how close they'd come to something irreversible. The presence lingered for a moment longer. Then it receded. Not disappearing. Choosing distance. Victoria exhaled, knees trembling now that the moment had passed. She didn't collapse. She didn't need to. She stood until the air felt light again, until the desert returned to being just desert. Back at base, no one cheered. There were no high fives, no relief-drunk laughter. Only quiet. Callahan found her near the perimeter fence at sunset. The light caught the dragon and softened it, made it look less like a warning and more like a record. "You could have died," he said. "Yes," she replied. "Why weren't you afraid?" She thought about that. "I was," she said, "but fear doesn't get to make the decision." He nodded slowly. "You changed things." "No," she said. "I respected them enough to let them choose." Harlow joined them, hands clasped behind his back. "Command wants a report." She almost smiled, almost. "Tell them the truth," she said, carefully. That night Victoria sat alone in her quarters for the last time. Orders were coming, transfers, new protocols. Her presence here had served its purpose. She rolled up her sleeve and traced the dragon one final time. It hadn't been a threat. It had been a reminder. Strength wasn't volume. Authority wasn't humiliation. Power wasn't forcing the world to bend. Sometimes strength was restraint carried so long it left marks. Sometimes dignity didn't argue. It didn't shout. It didn't demand recognition. It simply stood and waited for the world to notice. And when it finally did, everything changed.